Good afternoon, and welcome to all of you on this webinar sponsored by the League of Women Voters of Massachusetts Environmental Action and Advocacy Committee. The League is a good government organization known mostly for its work around voter registration and voter access issues. But the League has also been a strong champion of meaningful climate change and environmental action since the 1960s. The state-level Environmental Action and Advocacy Committee that Karen and I co-chair began in 2017 and was formed as a public awareness and advocacy resource dedicated to highlighting the urgent need to address climate change. You will find links to recordings of all past webinars and forums sponsored by the League Environmental Action and Advocacy Committee at our State League website, lwvma.org. Check under Climate Change and the Environment on the homepage. The focus of today's webinar is a recent and important regional agreement to work together to develop a regional plan to drive down carbon emissions from the transportation sector, the largest contributor to greenhouse gas emissions in New England. You'll also learn about related legislation filed as a bill this session by Representative Lori Ehrlich and State Senator Eric Lesser, as a complement to the regional work being done at the executive branch level under Governor Charlie Baker. The League of Women Voters of Massachusetts is honored to have Jordan Stutt of the Acadia Center and Prayal Patel, Chief of Staff for Representative Ehrlich, who is unable to be here today because of budget deliberations underway at the State House. We'll be turning this over to Jordan as soon as I introduce him. Jordan Stutt is the Carbon Programs Director at the Acadia Center, a nonprofit organization that works across key sectors of the economy in state, local, regional, and national jurisdictions to promote effective solutions for tackling the problem of climate change in state, local, regional, and national jurisdictions. In his role, Jordan conducts analysis, leads stakeholder coalitions, and engages with policymakers on three related issues: strengthening the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, advancing state-level carbon pricing initiatives, and developing regional climate policy to reduce emissions from the transportation sector. Jordan, I'll now be turning this over to you to begin.
Great. Thank you, Anna, and thank you, Karen, and thanks to the League of Women Voters for organizing this and inviting me to speak. Just a little bit about Acadia Center. Anna gave us a great introduction, but in this context, in the Transportation and Climate Initiative context, we have been really closely involved in this process for a number of years now, really focused at both the regional level, where Acadia Center works, and here in Massachusetts, where I'm based. So it's been an exciting few years working on this, and there's a lot of exciting progress ahead. Next slide, please. So just to start by going backwards, the Transportation and Climate Initiative came together back in 2010, and it consists of 12 states and DC. So all of the states that you see highlighted in that map are part of TCI. And since 2010, state staff from environmental agencies and departments of transportation have been meeting regularly, either in person or by calls, and those meetings are facilitated by the Georgetown Climate Center. And they've really been putting their heads together to try to figure out what kind of solutions they can put into place to address transportation pollution, which is the largest source of CO2 emissions in this region and has been for some time now. And together, working with the Georgetown Climate Center, these states have done a great deal of analysis looking at different types of policies that can help address the transportation pollution crisis. They've done stakeholder outreach, but a lot of it has been behind the scenes work. And that was at least the case until 2017, when a number of these states announced that they were going to work together to start getting stakeholder input to develop solutions to reduce transportation emissions. And beginning in 2018, a number of these states began hosting listening sessions. And they collaborated across the region. There were state-specific listening sessions in Massachusetts. And all told, over 500 different participants were at these meetings giving the states feedback on what kind of policies they wanted to see, what kind of challenges they faced in their own lives or in their own businesses when it comes to reducing transportation emissions. And the states did a really thorough job of gathering all of that input, and they compiled it into a summary report that was released towards the end of 2018. And the top line finding that you can see in that summary report was that there is broad support for a cap and invest program for the transportation sector. And in December of 2018, 9 states and DC announced that they were going to work together over the course of 2019 to actually develop that program. And those 9 states are shaded in darker green there in that map. Next slide, please. And just to put this into context, the TCI states have seen electric sector CO2 emissions fall pretty dramatically in the last decade or so. But in that same time period, transportation emissions really haven't budged. And in Massachusetts, that's even more exaggerated, with emissions falling really rapidly in the electric sector due to a number of factors, including Massachusetts being the #1 state in energy efficiency, but also due to their participation in the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. And that has really informed a lot of the thinking to date on TCI. Next slide, please. So when it comes to actually designing a TCI program and looking at the cap and invest model, the first key question is where the cap will be set. And that's determined by a number of factors, like which fuels will be covered, how ambitious do the states want to be, but ultimately it's that cap level that will set the emissions reduction trajectory. So unlike a carbon tax, carbon fee and dividend program, where it's the price per ton that really determines the environmental ambition, in this setting, it's that cap level. And for each ton of CO2 that's allowed by that cap, one allowance is created. States will then auction those allowances. Essentially, it gives polluters the allowance to emit 1 ton of CO2. And those polluters then have to buy those allowances from the states through auctions, and those auctions generate proceeds, which raises the big question of how to spend those proceeds. How do states want to invest the value of those allowances? From Acadia Center's perspective, we see that as a key tool for reducing pollution, both of CO2 and co-pollutants, of improving our really outdated transportation infrastructure, and making sure that we're delivering equitable outcomes. And we can talk more about that later, and I know that Rael will as well. And to the right, just have some key stats on RGGI. There's a lot to learn from RGGI, things that we can improve on in terms of how to make sure that there's an equitable process and equitable benefits. But at a macro level, it's really been impressive what this region has been able to achieve since they've been participating in RGGI, including cutting CO2 emissions by about half. Electricity prices have actually fallen by almost 6% since the program started, and the economy has grown by 34%. And on all of those metrics, the RGGI states have been outpacing the rest of the country. So the suggestion that you can't have this kind of carbon policy and a thriving economy has really been debunked by RGGI. Next slide, please. So at the regional level, the states are now working hard to get input, to get both expert opinions, but also the opinions of everybody who depends on the transportation network to get to school, to get to work, to get wherever they need to go. And so they are hosting a series of stakeholder engagement opportunities, the first of which is actually happening next week on April 30th at the Boston Public Library. And that'll be a technical workshop focused on key design elements. And I would encourage anybody who's interested in really understanding at a deeper level how this program might be constructed, I'd encourage you to attend. I believe you can go to the TCI website and register there. And following that meeting on the 30th, there will be meetings on May 15th in Newark, New Jersey, to talk about how to ensure that this program is actually delivering benefits to disadvantaged communities, whether that's the communities that have been historically overburdened by transportation pollution, or those that have been underserved by the current suite of transportation options. And finally, there will be another workshop focused on how investments should be structured in the states. And also at the regional level, there's a pretty robust group of advocates that are working together to advance this program and make sure it advances in a good way. Acadia Center manages a listserv for that regional coalition. So please feel free to send me an email if you'd like to be added to that listserv to get regular updates and to get information for our bi-weekly calls to talk through strategy at the regional and state level. There are also occasional advocates meetings. And we try to be really well coordinated on the multi-state strategy that we're deploying to advance this program. And I'm excited to announce that on Monday, April 29th, there will be a website that you can go to. It'll be called Our Transportation Future, and will be a really helpful resource for information on TCI and what the advocates are doing. Next slide, please. And finally, just want to zoom in on what's been happening in Massachusetts. And we're really fortunate that the Baker administration has made TCI a priority, and they have been providing some really key leadership across the region. Starting with 2017 listening sessions, Massachusetts was the first to really start getting that input from stakeholders. In 2018, Governor Baker's Future of Transportation Commission developed a really robust outline of transportation policy needs. And one of them was the suggestion that we should participate in a regional cap and invest program. And now, Secretary Beaton of Energy and Environmental Affairs is chairing the overall TCI working group. Commissioner Suberg, Commissioner of Mass DEP, is chairing the policy working group, and other staff from DEP and DOT are playing key leadership roles. So they are really helping to move this process forward. And in terms of what we can do, again, we are fortunate for the Baker administration's leadership, but they're taking a risk in being so bullish on this. And it's important that we as advocates are supporting them and making it clear that there are a lot of people out there who want to see this kind of progress to reduce pollution, to improve our transportation system, to deliver more equitable outcomes. So we can support that. We can also share our own vision for what this program should look like. A lot of the key decisions have yet to be made, and we can help to shape those decisions. And one of the most important decisions will be how Massachusetts invests the auction proceeds that it gets from allowance auctions. Thinking both in terms of the types of investments made, thinking about how we can improve public transit, how we can electrify transportation, how we can reduce emissions and better serve Massachusetts businesses and residents, but also how that decision-making process should be structured. And I am very glad that there is a bill that's been filed by Representative Ehrlich and Senator Lesser that provides a lot of thought leadership, frankly, in that regard. It creates an investment board that's represents a lot of different stakeholder groups. And Prayel, who is sitting next to me here, is going to talk through that in more detail. But just want to say thanks to Representative Ehrlich, her staff, and Senator Lesser as well. Great. And with that, I think Lana is going to introduce Prayel.
Thank you, Jordan. It's my pleasure to introduce Prayel Patel. We were a little disappointed to hear that Representative Ehrlich could not be with us today as planned, but we are very fortunate indeed to have Representative Ehrlich's Chief of Staff, Prayel, filling in to share information about a first out of the gate bill filed by State Representative Ehrlich and State Senator Eric Lesser. The bill is intended to complement the regional work being done at the executive level. In her role, Prayel is responsible for legislative and constituent work, as well as supervising other staff members. So Prayel, welcome and take it away.
Hi, thanks for having me, Lana. Thanks for that introduction. Like Lana just said, this bill is a complement to the TCI program. It's going to build on that initiative put forth by Governor Baker, and it's meant to kind of guide the process statewide as it takes form. This bill is going to ensure that the proceeds from TCI are used for innovative and sustainable solutions for transportation here in Massachusetts. The bill has been filed by Rep. Lori Ehrlich, who represents Marblehead, Swampscott, and Lynn, and Senator Eric Lesser, who has part of Western Massachusetts. Next slide, please. Just a little bit of background information on climate change. I think back in December, the UN released a report stating that we have just about 10 years to mitigate the worst of climate disaster. So this bill is especially very timely right now, especially because transportation makes up one of the largest contributions to the greenhouse gas effect here in Massachusetts. You know, it's not just CO2, it's also methane. The rep has also filed a bill to do with gas and to mitigate natural gas use as well. So that is something to look out for. Next slide, please. So in Massachusetts, the transportation sector makes up almost half of total emissions, compared to just about 30% of total emissions for the nation. So here in Massachusetts, transportation is contributing a lot more the greenhouse gases than it is for the nation overall. A report from the Georgetown Climate Center in Cambridge Systematics found that between 29 and 40%, sorry, let me repeat that. A regional transportation program could reduce carbon emissions between 29 and 40% by 2030, and also increase economic growth between 11.7 billion and 17.7 billion by 2030. Next slide, please. And as Jordan said, the TCI program is going to have 9 states and DC. And this program is not only going to help reduce emissions, but it's going to help the economy as well. Next slide, please. So this bill really does 2 major things. It creates the Modern and Sustainable Solutions for Transportation Trust Fund, and it also establishes a 15-member board known as the Modern and Sustainable Solution for Transportation Investment Board. The board will be co-chaired by the Secretary of Transportation and the Secretary of Environmental Affairs. This bill is also going to require the DEP, which is the Department of Environmental Protection, in consultation with the Department of Transportation and the Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs, to establish a transportation climate program to regulate the annual total greenhouse gas emissions released by the transportation sector, and it has to comply with the regional agreement, CCI. Some of the guiding factors here are going to be, some of the criterias are going to be enhancing and expanding mass transportation services, particularly for both low-income communities and environmental justice populations, electrifying transportation services, including bus and rail in communities with disproportionate rates of exposure to diesel and asthma incidences, programs to accelerate adoption of zero-emission vehicles, projects to expand and increase the safety of bicycle and pedestrian transportation, greater resiliency of transportation infrastructure to withstand the impacts of climate change, programs that will promote density, reduce congestion, and increase the production of affordable housing near transit, and reimbursement to the Commonwealth for costs associated with the administration of the Transportation Climate Program. All right, next slide, please. Touched on some of this already when I was speaking. Some of the other things the board will be responsible for. So the board will create some criteria that should determine how the proposal should be evaluated to advance statewide goals for transportation investment needs. The board is also required to submit a plan of priority investment biannually. I think it's every 2 years, right? So that's biannually. And draft of the plan must have public hearings conducted as well. And then the board has to also report on the performance of the Transportation Climate Program and investments from the Trust Fund, I think every 5 years. Next slide, please. And yeah, that's a gist of the bill and the TCI program. So if you have any questions for either me or Jordan, we'd be happy to take them.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Priel and Jordan. It is time to take questions. To ask a question, type it into the Q&A box. Please specify who you are directing the question to if you wish, and we will go right to it. This is probably a question for Priel, but either one of you can certainly answer. Priel and Jordan are together in the same office, so they can, either one of them can answer. Why is the bill trying to create consumer savings as opposed to just being cost neutral?
I'm not sure if I understand the question.
Yeah, I could you maybe elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah.
Okay, the asker can elaborate on that. Okay, this is kind of a long question for Jordan. A recent climate exchange report, on RGGI concluded that market forces caused most of the RGGI emissions decline. Natural gas prices have dropped 70% since 2008, which had 20 times the impact of RGGI in facilitating the region's transition away from coal. Canadian Hydro imports also cut emissions, but mainly due to their competitive prices, not to RGGI. That was all a quote. Here's your question. I'd like to know your take on this finding and its implications for TCI.
Sure. Good question. And I've actually talked with the folks over at Climate Exchange quite a bit about that report and the development of it. So they did some really good research, but it's really hard to attribute emissions reductions to policies, particularly policies like cap and invest, that are designed to work in a complementary way to other emissions reduction strategies. So first, I will say that one study from the Duke Energy Institute that looked at what would have happened had RGGI not been in place and compared that through a modeling exercise to what actually happened in the wholesale energy markets, found that most of, at least the early year emissions reductions, were attributable to RGGI, more than any of the other factors, including the economic downturn that we experienced or the transition to natural gas. But I think more importantly is that RGGI or another cap and invest program isn't necessarily designed to be the driving force of emissions reductions. It's meant to ensure that we achieve a minimum amount of emissions reductions. So if we get to 2030 and dramatically reduce our transportation emissions because all of a sudden everybody is driving completely affordable EVs or taking great public transit that happens to get really cheap, that's a win for everybody. And even if that means that the allowance price is low, that's a great outcome. So I think I don't think we should be getting bogged down in how much of the emissions reductions the cap and invest program is driving, but rather what's the level of ambition? What's the minimum amount of emissions reductions that this program will ensure? And how can the investments that are enabled by allowance auction proceeds help to accelerate that decarbonization process? So that's a long-winded answer to a great question, but hope that helps.
Okay, great. Next question. This one is from Alan. Why isn't New York participating with the 9 other states, and how much of a problem is New York's absence?
Another good question. And so in that map, it was pretty clear that New York, New Hampshire, and Vermont are the 3 states that are part of TCI that haven't signed on to the agreement to actually participate in this cap and invest program yet. But starting with New York, staff from New York remain deeply engaged in the conversations, in the meetings that are happening. They've been at the table throughout this whole process and have been helping to really lead the way in a lot of different ways. So I'm still very optimistic that they will be part of the program when it does launch. I'm also cautiously optimistic that Maine, under their new governor, Janet Mills, will be participating in the program as well, though they have yet to sign on.
All right. Question from Maria. Are any other states in the U.S. doing this and with information to inform our efforts?
Yeah, California has been participating in a nearly economy-wide cap and invest program that does include the transportation sector for a number of years now. And they actually participate in a joint market with the province of Quebec. And so they've generated substantial revenue that they've reinvested into their transportation sector to advance clean transportation technologies. California has taken some recent measures to ensure that more of the benefits of those investments are going to disadvantaged communities. So I think there's a lot of positives that can be learned from that experience. There are also some bumps along the way, to put it lightly, but there's certainly a lot that we can learn about how to engage disadvantaged communities in the policy development process as well.
All right, next question is from Sally. Does H3008 include plans for expanding public transportation for rural communities where public transportation is extremely limited, not just public transportation in the Boston metro area?
So the 15-member investment board that this bill creates takes that into consideration. We want to make sure that this bill and this investment board specifically is representative of the people who live in Massachusetts. So the board actually does include some rural representatives. So we have a representative from Western Massachusetts region that will be on the board. There will also be a representative from an environmental justice population and regional transit authority representative as well.
And just to build on that, the actual percentages of how the money will be used haven't been determined yet.
Right.
That's, I think, part of the value of this bill is that it gives those stakeholders who haven't always had a say in how proceeds from a program like this are used. It gives them a real voice in determining how best to use these proceeds to improve our transportation sector across the state.
All right, next question is from Lucia. At the Future of Transportation presentations I've attended, the speakers say the top priority is moving more people in fewer vehicles. Is Bill 3008 connected to the Future of Transportation Commission report? If so, how specifically is it connected?
The bill is not connected to the report. We've met with some of the members of the commission who have found out about the bill and have wanted to discuss it. But I think this is all part of the same sort of conversation in terms of how are we going to innovate Massachusetts transportation and make it environmentally sustainable. So I think it is not related to the commission, but I would say it complements the same goals of the commission.
Yeah, well said. And I think VMT, everybody recognizes the importance of reducing vehicle miles traveled, VMTs. And in order to do that effectively, we need to make alternatives to the single occupancy vehicle more attractive. So we need to improve public transit. We need to make biking and active mobility safer and more appealing. So I think the bill is well designed to try to improve those transportation options.
Okay, Lana, did you have a question?
Actually, two things. One is Richard typed a question, and I was trying to get clarification on the question, and it went to answer live, which was not what I wanted, and it disappeared. So, Richard, could you please retype your question? I don't know if this gives a little clarity to the question that was asked about the bill trying to create consumer savings as opposed to just being cost neutral, but I'm wondering if it relates to differences between a cap and trade approach versus a carbon pricing approach, where carbon, cost neutrality has been a feature. I am just taking a shot at this, so I don't know if that means anything, Jordan, to you or to Prayel in terms of answering that question.
Just to clarify, this bill doesn't create the TCI program. I think that might be what that question was going at. This bill is a complement to the program that is being driven by the governor.
Yeah, and I probably should have added a little bit more detail in my presentation, but the states working together as a region will develop this program, but ultimately the decision for how to spend proceeds is up to each individual state. They will retain autonomy in that regard, maybe with some general requirements, but it'll come down to the state level. And so
this bill creates the investment board that, as Jordan just said, the allowances that we get here in Massachusetts, the investment board has a list of criteria to craft where that money should be allocated, essentially.
Okay, to elaborate on that, Lucia is the person who asked the question originally, and she is trying to clarify the original question about cost saving. Consumer savings was listed on the slide as one of the many goals. So I think the question comes from the fact that there was a goal about consumer savings. I don't know.
I mean, to me, I think that means trying to find ways to reduce people's transportation bills.
Right.
You don't get, everybody gets an electric bill. You don't really receive a transportation bill each month. But we know that lower income populations spend a higher portion of their income on transportation, whether that's because they have to drive or they have to spend more money on public transit. So we want to make sure that cheaper public transit is affordable, that there's available ride sharing and all kinds of opportunities to reduce transportation costs.
Right. Yep, I would agree with Jordan on what that meaning meant.
Okay. Next question is from Alan. Ever since the voters beat back linking the gas tax to inflation, the legislature has been quite shy about doing anything that would raise gas prices. And now we see the yellow vest protests in France. How realistic is it to think the legislature will adopt H3008? Always a question.
Take that first.
Do you have any thoughts on that?
So the question is, how likely is it that the legislature will take it up?
Like it says realistic, but yeah.
Well, at the end of the day, this bill really does hinge on the development of the TCI program. If there is no program, the bill doesn't really make sense. So at the end of the day, the program needs to be developed, but this bill empowers the legislature to help kind of determine how these allowances are going to get spent. So if this program does become a reality, I think that this bill is definitely going to be discussed because how these allowances are spent is going to be a real question. It's going to be one of the first questions that's asked. So I imagine that this bill will be looked at pretty closely by members of the legislature.
Yeah, and just to get to the other parts of that question, I think concerns about cost impacts are certainly valid, and the states and advocates and those working on TCI are thinking long and hard about how to address those concerns and how to make sure that the proceeds from this program are used to alleviate cost burdens or actually deliver benefits to the communities that can least afford them. And I think it's important to recognize that right now, things are pretty bad when it comes to transportation in Massachusetts. We were recently ranked, Boston was recently ranked #1 in terms of congestion. We're in the bottom half of the 40s in terms of transportation infrastructure. We have a couple of cities that rank really high in American Lung Association's ranking of the cities with the worst asthma in the US. So in terms of whether or not we have the political will to act, I think we absolutely do, because everybody recognizes that not just climate change, but the urgency of our our failing and aging transportation system requires action.
Okay, next question. Are emissions from air travel part of the emissions statistic of 43%? And if so, how much?
I don't think they are. I'm not positive, but I think it's hard to attribute air travel emissions to a specific state.
Right, that would make sense.
Okay. Can you elaborate on who will be purchasing allowances under TCI and how enforcement would work? Via fuel purchases, vehicle registrations, etc.
Yeah, another good question, and that question has not been answered definitively yet. That'll be one of the issues that's discussed at this workshop next Tuesday at the Boston Public Library. But the TCI states did put out a white paper on this issue late in 2017, and they've identified a group of what they're calling prime suppliers. So the companies that bring transportation fuels into the region for consumption in this region, they would be responsible for the carbon content of those fuels. So it would be them who would have to buy allowances through auctions or through the secondary market. So the individual consumer wouldn't have to worry about calculating their carbon bill. The price would ultimately be mostly baked into the price that you see at the fuel pump.
Okay. What are the potential costs of TCI, and how do they weigh against the potential funds coming in from the proceeds?
I would say the benefits of the proceeds will greatly outweigh the costs. And one reason for that is that most of the fuel that we burn in this region for transportation isn't produced here. Almost none of it is, in fact. So when we think about the economic costs and benefits, using less gasoline is really good for our local economy. In terms of the actual dollar per ton amount, that will be dependent on where the cap level is set, and that hasn't been decided yet. California's program has a dollar per ton price, a little bit over $15 per ton right now. If we had something similar here in Massachusetts, that would generate about $450 million per year for reinvestment into clean transportation and improved transportation. So,
I mean, I think the other way to look at it as well is what are the costs if we don't take action on reducing transportation emissions? What are the impacts going to be on our economy if we don't act?
Right. Yeah. Sitting in traffic. The amount of time that commuters in the greater Boston area sit in traffic is a huge drag on the economy. The inability of people who live further outside of Boston to get around on public transit, that keeps people from getting to good jobs. It keeps people from getting to schools and work. That's a huge drag on the economy. So starting to address those issues will certainly bring really substantial benefits.
Okay, next question. From Joel. How many Republican Mass, House, and Senate members are sponsors of Rep. Ehrlich's bill? To what extent are they engaged in the discussion?
I do not have an exact number of Republicans at the top of my head. Quickly scan through this.
While you're looking at that, I will say that, I mean, it's a bipartisan effort region-wide in terms of the governors who are pushing this issue forward. Like I said, Governor Baker has been really at the front of the charge here, but so too is Governor Hogan in Maryland, Governor Scott in Vermont. So this is not a partisan issue. Everybody recognizes that not only is transportation polluting our air and contributing to climate change, it's also a sector that we need urgent improvements in terms of how we get around. So I'm pleased to see that it has been so bipartisan.
Yeah, and I mean, like I said, so this bill is really a complement to the program. The program is being led by a Republican governor. So I think a lot of what we've been doing with this bill is just informing people about what it does at this point, and letting people know that this bill doesn't actually create the TCI program. So we're really at the education phase of the bill right now, but I imagine that it'll have bipartisan support because it's pretty well known that we need to be reducing transportation emissions here in Massachusetts.
Okay, thank you. This is from Grady. It's not exactly on target with what we're discussing, but maybe you can help. How does cap and invest differ from cap and trade?
I think cap and invest falls under the umbrella of cap and trade. The important distinction is that in a cap and invest program, the proceeds are actually used for consumer benefit. In some cap and trade programs, like the initial acid rain program, that was a federal cap and trade program, very few of the allowances were sold, so they were given directly to polluters, meaning that they receive the value of those allowances rather than residents and businesses getting the value of those allowances. So I think it's an important distinction to make, that the value of those allowances will be used to deliver public benefit through transportation investments. In RGGI, it's been through clean energy and energy efficiency investments. But I think it's a really important distinction, and that's one of the reasons that cap and invest programs have delivered such great emissions reductions and economic benefits.
Okay, this is from Carolyn. What are the advantages and disadvantages of TCI versus a revenue neutral carbon fee and dividend program that would also take into account air travel and building energy costs?
I think the biggest advantage of TCI is that it's a regional program. So when we look at a program that could potentially include all the states from Maine down to Washington, D.C. and Virginia, it's a huge amount of emissions. And we have the value of regional collaboration, recognizing that cars move across state lines, trucks that are transporting our goods move across state lines. We need to be coordinated on policy. The disadvantage, I think, is that most of the carbon fee and dividend, carbon fee and rebate proposals are economy-wide, and we clearly need to address more than just transportation and the electric sectors. We need to address everything. Even if we have a price on emissions from the transportation sector and the electric sector, that's still only about 60% of the emissions in Massachusetts. So this is not a final answer, it's part of the solution.
Okay, there's a clarification here on one of the previous questions. It says in the Future of Transportation Commission report, they listed air travel as 4% of greenhouse gas emissions in the state. So that's a point of information.
Okay.
Here's another question. Won't there be leakage issues? And how can we avoid, having most drivers near the New Hampshire state line gassing up in the Granite State?
Yeah, that's a really good question. That's another issue that I think will get some attention at the workshop next week. It's a little bit trickier to address this in the transportation sector, where folks can gas up in one state and move to another state. I think there is some modeling that's being conducted to better understand how driver behavior might respond to a price signal on carbon emissions. But my guess, and I haven't seen the modeling yet, is that it would drive very minimal emissions leakage.
Okay. Question from Sally. Are the legislators looking at how to make sure that lower income residents most impacted by higher fuel costs will be able to afford those added costs? Representative Benson's carbon bill, H 2810, offers some excellent strategies for addressing these issues of equality.
I would say yes. This bill was very carefully crafted to, like I said before, the investment board includes representatives from rural Massachusetts and regional transit authorities and low-income communities as well. And then the investment board is also directed to keep in mind how low-income communities are affected. So the board has to try to promote density, reduce congestion, increase production near affordable housing. So there are definitely some of the criteria that's listed in the bill would keep in mind the struggles that some of the low-income populations in Massachusetts are going through.
Yeah, and we did some outreach to folks on the Green Justice Coalition around this bill.
The environmental justice, yep.
And one of the pieces of feedback there was that all of the solutions for how to ensure that those cost impacts are lessened in those communities haven't really been developed yet. But what's most important is that those communities have a voice and have representation on that investment board to work through those questions and ultimately make sure that the proceeds are used to benefit those communities.
The first criteria listed in the bill for the board to follow is enhancing and expanding mass transportation services, particularly for both low-income communities and environmental justice populations.
And this is Lana. I just want to break in with a comment that I believe those same groups are groups that Representative Benson worked with around the equity issues. So it's really good to see those groups being heard and factored into this. I have a question about the way the bill or the plan could develop, and where it's a regional effort, it's a collaborative effort. Can states be as bold as they want to be, or does there have to be some sort of settling and compromise around how aggressive the plan can be? Aggressive is not the best word to use, but I think you understand what I'm trying to get at here. What are the constraints on how bold any bill can be or any plan can be?
Sure. Yeah, so that regional cap will be set through a negotiation between the participating states. Some will inevitably be bolder, and we hope that Massachusetts will be one of those states. Everything that Governor Baker and his administration have said so far suggests that they will be bold in leading that charge. Other states will likely be a little bit more reluctant to be so bold. But we hope that with a strong push from the advocacy community, from business groups, from a really broad constituency calling for an ambitious cap level, that we can make sure that this truly is an ambitious program.
Thank you.
Okay, let's take a couple more questions. Stan asks, has the Association for Commuter Transportation or any of its Transportation Management Association members in the region been part of the planning yet?
Good question, and I don't know the answer to that off the top of my head.
Okay. Are there any more questions? Yep, here comes one. Cynthia writes, this is a little off target, but is important. Does creating and enforcing more stringent emission standards for passenger vehicles and commercial vehicles and trucks have any place in this conversation? Can we emulate California here, or is that a stretch too far?
Yes, absolutely. There's a place in this conversation for every kind of strategy possible to reduce transportation emissions. I think that's part of the beauty of this cap and invest model, is that it's designed to complement those other strategies. Massachusetts is a ZEV state, so we do have a standard, but thinking about additional ways to incentivize that transition to zero emission vehicles is going to be hugely important, and hopefully proceeds from TCI can be used to accelerate that transition. Okay,
there was a very early question. What does It's just very basic. What does a regional transportation program mean?
Yeah, I think it's an incredibly vague term, but sometimes that might be used as shorthand for this regional cap and invest program. I think that was a term that was thrown around a lot before the states had really settled on going forward with cap and invest as the policy model.
Okay. There's actually no more questions. Lana, do you have any more questions?
No, no, I don't at this time.
Okay. So I'd like to thank Priel and Jordan very much. And we're going to go back to Lana now for wrapping it up. Lana.
Great, thank you. Well, we have almost reached the end of the webinar program, and thank you again, Jordan and Priel, for bringing us up to speed on these exciting, what many people consider very exciting regional and state efforts aimed at tackling a major source of emissions in New England transportation. I want to just remind all participants that they will receive an email from the League of Women Voters of Massachusetts with the link to the recorded webinar and related materials in the next few days. A final thank you to members of the League and the public from the New England region who joined us today. We urge you all to stay informed, stay engaged, and look for opportunities to advance this important work. And don't forget to check past programs and other climate change related information, including news about both the TCI work and Bill H3008 at our website at lwvma.org under Climate Change and the Environment on the homepage. Thank you again all for joining us.
Thank you.